All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, wherever you may find yourselves, and welcome to this event entitled Rethinking the Sahel, organized by Columbia University in New York and the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom. My name is Harry Verhoeven. I'm with the Center on Global Energy Policy, School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event, which is open to the press, which is on the record and being live streamed. And I'd like you to be cognizant of those things. A few more housekeeping announcements in just a second. But I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Laura Rival in Oxford, who's going to welcome you from the Oxford Department of International Development. Laura, over to you.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to meet you online. And it's very exciting for us to have this joint event. Thank you very much to Harry and his center for facilitating it. Basically, what has happened in ODID is that in the last couple of years, we have really tried to put together a program of talks and events to think more deeply about the ways in which climate change figures into the challenges of development. And you can go on our webpage and you will find some information about this. We have quite a number of master's degrees in the department, a DPhil degree, which bring all kinds of aspects of his work about climate change and development, but doesn't really address climate change sufficiently. We have a program in global governance and diplomacy, a program in migration studies, a program in development studies, a program in economic development, etc., etc. And we want to mainstream that issue of climate change everywhere. Now, what is very exciting for us is that a lot of our colleagues, researchers, and students are working in Africa. And this is where having this collaboration for this webinar with Harry has been so important. I am myself a Latin Americanist, a specialist of the Amazon rainforest, so a lot of your issues will be totally new to me, but I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you, Laura. Again, the pleasure is entirely ours, entirely mine to be partnering with ODID and with you in particular. Indeed, a warm welcome to students both in Oxford and Columbia, as indeed elsewhere around the planet. So as I said, this event is open to the press. It's on the record and it's being live streamed. That means that any questions you may have, you can enter into the Q&A function that should be at the bottom of your screen. Those questions will be visible to myself as well as to Laura, and will enable us to put them to our panelists in the course of the discussion. We have about an hour and a half or so here together today, so hopefully there'll be ample time to address any concerns, questions, suggestions, ideas, contentions you want to put to our three esteemed guests here with us today. As I said, this event is called Rethinking the Sahel. And what it really tries to do is indeed to look at one of those regions of the world and those parts of Africa that's very often described in highly alarmist terms, very often seen through a highly pessimistic, indeed even Malthusian lens of sequential crises, political crises, economic crises, social crises, and indeed, of course, in the last 30, 40, 50 years, increasingly environmental crises. And what we hope to do here today is to address some of those concerns that do exist about the countries, the societies that make up this part of the world, but also to show you another perspective, other ways of thinking about the interrelations between social, environmental, and political change, especially as they pertain to dynamics of climate change and access to energy, and the role, very importantly, that communities, that social capital can play in those. And for those purposes, I'm joined by three absolutely fantastic guests drawn entirely from the region itself, or at least countries adjacent to the region. The first speaker we'll hear from is Professor Sheikha Mbow, who's professor at the University of Pretoria, who's the director of Future Africa, if I'm not mistaken, as well as a professor at Michigan State University. He's got a background, PhD from the University of Dakar and Copenhagen, who will go first, and he'll try to set a bit the scene about the region and these social and environmental complexities. And next we'll hear from Nora Beramouni, who's from Algeria, who indeed worked for UNDP Algeria as well as the World Wildlife Fund for a number of years before joining the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, where today she's a senior regional official for forestry, and indeed also the secretary. I'm just going to look at my notes here. Secretary indeed for the African Forestry and Wildlife Commission. She'll speak specifically about a remarkable initiative called the Great Greenwall in the Sahel, and she'll talk a bit about the efforts being undertaken there and some of the challenges that those efforts are encountering. And last but not least, we'll have the privilege of hearing from Husseini Kalilou, who is from Niger, who finished graduate work at New York University as well as at Stayer University, if I'm not mistaken. Also studied in Algeria at the undergraduate level, if I'm not mistaken, and who collaborated for an important report with the UN Security Council on those linkages between security and climate change. And he'll talk a bit, not so much about conflict, but about peace building in the Sahel and the role that social capital and again, the environment can play in bringing people together rather than pushing them apart or pitting them against one another. So without further ado, I'll perhaps ask Dr. Sheikh to turn on his camera and to start his presentation. Again, any questions that you may have, please put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be able to relay them to the panelists later. But thank you very much. Sheikh, over to you.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you for all colleagues who set up this meeting. It's a real pleasure to talk about my passion is Sahel itself. And because of the sake of time, straight to the point, just to share with our communities the diversity of drivers that we have in the Sahel. That's my entry point. You can't just think about the Sahel unilaterally, just one single thing, which has been the case. You know, the military unrest, the drought in the Sahel. There are so many things that are overlapping, spatially and temporally, and that speaks a lot on the rural poverty and resilience of community. The rural equipment is absolutely very poor when it comes to food security production, food security and food production in the Sahel part of the West Africa region. So climate change and demographic trends are also quite important factors that needs to be considered. And I will skim over some recent land use, land cover change, you know, with the recent change on climate change that we have in the Sahel. So just as you rightly said, Harry, when people think about the Sahel, they think about one or two things, but the level of overlaps and the level of diversity of drivers are very many. The characteristic of the issue is all what you know, the water scarcity, wind erosion, and deforestation. But on the segue, we have so many land conversion, biodiversity degradation, change in local climate and soil conditions because of the high climate variability that we have in the Sahel. I'm thinking that some of the people who are in the audience now have done a lot of work in the climate variability in the Sahel, which is one of the most variable climate in the world, and has shown a lot of drought period in the past with a lot of human security related to it. And the third pillar, which comes down to my mind, is the human influence. The options that people have in the Sahel management, some type of use of fires, for instance, or the overgrazing in the pastoral system. And all those things, you know, they interact in a very complex manner. It's a conundrum that make it very difficult to just have one size fits all solution or a blanket approach in developing the Sahel or trying to get the best out of the natural resources. So now, just to give you an idea of the transect, if you go from the Sahara region, as you can see, with less than 200 millimeters, down to a more humid zone of the West Africa, which is not the Sahel anymore, the Sahel will span around the Sahel and Sudan areas, where we have a lot of change in the farming system first. So what we are talking about is a shift from colonial time to now, from traditional crops for human food production to more cash crop production, such as groundnut, cotton in this side in the south. So the big challenge that we have in the Sahel is how to do the check and balances between food crops and cash crop, because the cash crop has been almost imposed during colonial time with the intention to bring some financial resources to local communities. But I have never seen in the whole Sahel any cash crop that has changed the life and livelihood of people in terms of income, which are enough for them to survive, to pay education, to pay their health services, and also to buy other kind of food that they need. The rice has been imported from Asia, and now rice is becoming one of those commodities which are very expensive in the local market, and sometimes nowhere to be seen in the market. It's the same thing on the pastoral system, on the red zone here. We have been shifting from transhumance to more intensive system animal feeding, which requires some sort of cost and investment for communities, which they often don't have actually. So there's a whole set of change in livelihood of people imposed by the external market forces, imposed by some colonial system that brings top-down rules that the communities, have to adopt, and that divert very, very progressively to the traditional approach of managing land in the Sahel. So it's very important to think of those shifts, which has been historical shift, recent history, I mean, that has put the Sahel in the situation where it is. The same thing applies with the land tenure system, and I tried to revisit it based on the West Africa perspective from the 19th century to recent history, where land literally went from central government, central colonial system, with sometimes some recognition of local rules, local norms, local ownership, and it progressively went to what we call the third generation of decentralization, which is a territorialization of public development that brings more right to people. And you have seen recently in the news a lot of demonstration by communities because of land grabbing. They try to recollect their rights on their land, and the challenge of land grabbing and land investment has made power relationship between the capital owners and the natural resource owners, which are the communities, and they're not playing on the same level ground. A lot of challenge comes from that perspective actually, and we can discuss it in the panel. So all those trends come in a situation where you can think of the Sahel not only a doomed place or not a famed place, but a place where so many resources can be unlocked. I think of the Sahel, when I think about the Sahel, I think about opportunities. The opportunities for renewable energy, the solar system, the solar power potential in the Sahel is extremely huge, over 200 watts per square meter, which can really produce enough electricity without using any fossil fuel in the whole region, but yet the down investment is quite huge. The market, the population growth, the urban development create a huge market potential, and the market is not only West Africa, but also the global market, because you see now in US on the shelves, so many products coming from West Africa, such as fonio or moringa product, etc. The livestock, I've been in Chad recently. The increase of the livestock in Chad, despite climate change, has been phenomenal. And it's the same in all countries. The issue is how that plays out with the trend in the pastoral system or the rangelands, where these livestock are really being fed from. Land restoration, with the land degradation neutrality, is a huge potential. The Great Greenwall, my colleague Nora will talk about it. Land restoration holds a great potential of flipping the rhetoric in terms of land potential, and then agriculture. Indeed, we have in the Sahel the biggest potential for water. The groundwater, the deep groundwater in the Sahel, is not used by over 1%. 99% of the deep groundwater in the Sahel is there, not used. And people think it's expensive to drill it because it's deep in the soil, but it's the same kind of prices you invest in the oil drilling, because that's the kind of technology you use in order to get that water. And with the solar energy we have in place, I think there is a potential to be explored there. And the enabling conditions are in this model, the financial, social partnership and entrepreneurship processes that needs to be put in place. So think about the Sahel, and that may be one of the lessons I would like to leave with the participant today. The Sahel is a land of opportunity. It's a young population, the women's population, the huge space where agriculture can be developed, the big rivers we have, Senegal, Gambia, Volta, Niger River, all those things are places where food production can be enough to feed the whole continent even. Now, in reality, this is what we have. We have a really backdated agricultural system, and only on this picture I tried to model all the issues we have in farming system in the Sahel. The lack of investment, look at this very basic equipment, the land degradation, they have poor soil, lessivated soil, yield gap comes with it, Food insecurity comes with it, and big poverty and famine, and no perspective for the young generation. Those two people who could have been released for school and get better education for improved lives of their parents are just there to try to grasp from this poor land few kilograms of millet for during 3 months to feed 9 months of food requirement for a whole family in the Sahel. And it's not a trivial image, something that we should keep in mind. So in terms of trend, what I wanted to share also is the recent increase in terms of productivity in the Sahel. It has not been always a linear degradation or declination of productivity. You can see in this area from Senegal down to Chad, even Sudan, Darfur area, that many, cool spots of biomass recovery. But at the same time, we have rapid population increase that do some appropriation of the net primary productivity that creates, this kind of fragmentation and land degradation in the whole area. So going through the next one, a good signal which I want to share, I will be sharing with you several good signals, not only negative ones, is the actually increase in tree cover in what we call farmland. It's agroforestry. Some people call it, trees outside of forest. And you can see from some of this graphic that the population has some influence in increasing, tree cover in many places of the Sahel. The more you get closer to village, the higher the density of trees. And it reminds me a person who worked in Nigeria called Mortimer back in the 80s, who was talking about more people, less erosion. And that's the kind of things that we can see here. The more we have people, it's counterintuitive because many people think that demographic population grows, then the vegetation will be depleted. But people tend to protect more their environment and plant more trees and take care of them when there are more population. And that's really one of these positive signals that we need to put into you. And that can transpire, between this human influence and the climate influence, there is a slight increase in rainfall in the Sahel, and that increase does not mean that climate change has not had impact in the Sahel. The climate variability has been more serious in terms of dry spells and change in the rainfall profile. But what we basically have is an increase of biomass production, both grass biomass and trees biomass. That's something we publish in Nature with some colleagues from Copenhagen that is shown in these things. So better productivity despite high climate variability. That's the message here. The other message which I want to show you is the extra season increase of rainfall, the dark blue one. The dark blue one are the rainfall that come late in the season. And that's a period in terms of phenology where normally you harvest. When you harvest and it rains, you lose a lot of food product. We call it food loss. It's not food waste, as you know, in the United States, where half of the food is just wasted, it's not eaten, but it comes to the plate of the consumer. In Africa, in particular the Sahel, the food loss is due to several climate parameters such as counter-season rainfall, humidity, and lack of storage capacity. So what the message in this slide is how the extra-seasonal rainfall will rather benefit the trees themselves. And trees are really continuing to recover, even in some degraded land with the recent studies we did. And we have a paper coming out of Nature Climate Change very soon this week, showcasing the importance of those trees, not only for soil fertility, for land recovery, but also many ecosystem services, and you could name it, fuel wood for communities and fruits, local fruits for communities and vitamin-rich product, etc. So now a whole picture of Africa in terms of the rainfall change as compared to change in carbon. I will focus on the rainfall. You can see in the Sahel, all those blue dots are places where rainfall has significantly increased above average. And the Sahel is one of those places that the total amount of rainfall has seriously increased. And that's an opportunity. We have heard about a lot of flooding coming in the Sahel, in all those cities. And that poses the question, water is an essential input for agriculture, and water is here, we don't know what to do about it. How do we adjust our policies to use that water, the extra water that we have in the recent humidification of the Sahel to make a better food product? And that transpires on the carbon train. The Sahel has gone from a net source of carbon to become a net sink of carbon. We also publish those results, and we have in this picture a station in Dara in Senegal where we monitor since 2001 the trend and the fluxes and biomass productivities that shows that those results. And it was confirmed by trend climate models that we have tested in here. And you can see it from Burkina Faso, Chiabata, to the Federbia in Senegal. Trees in the rangelands have also been increased. This picture in the north of Mali shows in 2004 the number of trees, and you can see in 2014 how the trees has increased on the same spot because of some of those variability. And before the last slide, I would like to share how important it is to consider this new trend into all the climate change responses, because in the forest transition curve, what we have in terms of REDD+ program, for instance, are in forested land or forest restored land. But in between, where we have agroforestry and trees out of forest, those trees are not accounted for, and they can be, significant contributors to carbon sequestration and mitigation to climate change, which is not accounted. So the Sahel should be considered as one of the geographical space that contribute to the global carbon budget, and it's not the case yet. And finally, some solutions which have been, protracted and that needs scaling up. There's a lot of innovations in the Sahel that just lays on various communities. There is not an effort to intentionally build from those elements and to scale them up overall. And these are some approaches to harvest water and to restore land, which has some impact, as you can see on the left picture. Very quickly, in few years, you can restore some land based on that. Optimization of water use. It's a water scarce area in general. Drip irrigation, some local solution for irrigation. And my favorite is where you see this water bottle, which is a recycled water bottle, and where we did a system of drip irrigation based on that to make this tree survive during the 9 months of the dry season, which is something that has been a big equation for the forest restoration communities. So to summarize, the conundrum we are talking about at the beginning in terms of drivers can't only be addressed if you just try to break it down and try to understand what the requirement for increased food production, what the requirement for increased valuation of unrated ecosystem and unrated practice by communities. What is the solutions for increasing water supply without jeopardizing the sustainability of water basin in the Sahel? And last but not least, how to use clean and renewable energy, particularly the solar energy, to respond to the climate development. The other things that are the implications of all of that is detailed in this diagram. So basically, these are the few things which I want to share with you, dear panelists, and I would wait for the discussion in order to bring more of my my inputs in the questionnaire and questionnaire responses that people may have. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Chet, for that tour de force in setting the social and ecological conditions under which this discussion takes place, to highlighting, as you rightly did, shifting away from this narrative, this very narrow narrative of crisis and disaster, to highlighting the opportunities, the counterintuitive trends, your reference to the more people, less erosion notion. Very, very, very interesting. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions about that. Now we're going to make things a little bit more specific, and we're going to go over to Nora Beramouni, who's going to tell us a bit about the Great Greenwall initiative, and who's going to pick up undoubtedly on some of these points made by Sheikh, and then perhaps detail them in her specific case study. Nora, fantastic to have you here with us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Harry, and also all the panelists and the participants who joined us today. So I will right now just share my screen. I hope you see it.
We do.
Okay, and I hope also you hear me clearly.
We do.
Okay, wonderful. So I think Sheikh gave me a bit of a good opening, yeah, to talk about this wonderful and transformative initiative that is called the Great Greenwall. This is an initiative that actually has been developed and adopted since 2007, before the SDGs, before the Agenda 2023, backed by the heads of state and governments and adopted by the African Union as a big, colossal, sustainable development program in order actually to address those challenges that we were talking about before, including environmental challenges, land degradation and desertification, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And from the other side, also the socioeconomic challenges. So poverty, food insecurity, energy security, insecurity, water insecurity, and so on. So this program has been really developed in order to encompass actually the Sahara and the Sahel zone, which is, as you could see, the North Africa, the circum-Sahara around the Sahara region, including the Sahel, but also the whole of Africa drylands. The African Union Commission really wanted to make sure to focus on this important 1 billion hectares of Africa's drylands. And if you could see, for instance, I've put there some figures within these drylands already regarding the Great Greenwall for the Sahara and the Sahel initiative. We are talking about 780 million hectares of really the intervention area of the Great Greenwall, and within it we have at least 195 million hectares that need restoration, which means that some of the areas within this core 780 million hectares are still, under a good state of conservation that could, of course, support the sustainable development of the population, a population that is actually currently reaches 232. But going also to the south, Sheikh, I think you are talking from Pretoria to the south, in the area of the southern Africa, which is also drylands. There have been also an important impetus from that sub-region to also, inspired by the Great Greenwall from the Sahara and the Sahel Initiative, to also develop their own Great Greenwall Kalahari Namib, or for the Southern Africa with the SADC in the lead. So this is just to tell that the Great Greenwall is really happening. It started since 2007, but already actually we have more than 10 years, so like 15 years already in the making. But then what are the results so far? So we can look at it in the next slide. But from the 2017 and currently in 2021, we have what we call the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration that has been launched this year in order to support the protection and the restoration of degraded ecosystems, whether they are in forests, in pastures, grasslands, in wetlands, and in oceans. And the Great Greenwall has been also actually identified and defined by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, that is co-led also by the FAO and UNEP, as one of the flagship programs in the world, for this big movement in this decade of action. So now diving into the Great Greenwall for the Sahel, just the Sahel region that involves 11 countries. Within this region, what you see in red is exactly the boundaries of what we call the Great Greenwall, across, from Senegal to Djibouti, Eritrea. And this area, we have done a very interesting continental assessment and an assessment of the Great Greenwall of forest and land use these past years. And we have actually presented and released the findings this year. We identified in this area an important opportunity of actually 162 million hectares that need restoration because, of course, of degradation that was also exacerbated by climate change and overpressure on natural resources. As Sheikh was saying, of course, people in these areas are really reliant on the agriculture, forest and land use, and pasture land, and so what we call the agro-silvopastoral systems, and without which they cannot really develop or survive. So I think it's really that's why the Great Greenwall has put as one of the priorities, the first priority, number one, is to ensure that the land is restored. And there was a target that has been agreed upon the member countries under the coordination of the Pan-African Agency of the Great Greenwall of about 100 million hectares by 2030. So we are really aiming to restore 100 million hectares by 2030 and create 10 million jobs and sequester 250 million tons of CO2. So actually the Great Greenwall seen not only for climate change adaptation and building resilience, but also to play a role in supporting mitigation, so carbon sink, of course, in these areas. So just to give you more an interesting example, you know, maybe some participants will say, okay, we have heard already about this big initiative, talks, but what is really happening on the ground? I'm just giving you a small, but I say it's a small, but really a big example, a big achievement in terms of, the Great Greenwall, in terms of restoring land and supporting resilience of communities and landscapes. It's a program that we call Against Desertification program in support of the Great Greenwall and South-South cooperation. And it has been implemented since the last half of 2014, so in inception, but really the restoration work has started in 2015, and it has been implemented mainly in actually currently it covers 10 countries, so 6 countries that have been supported by an EU funding, and the other countries supported by FAO and Turkey cooperation and Ministry of Forestry and Environment. So this program has really focused on 3 main areas. One is large-scale restoration, develop really a model to support restoration on the ground. Second is supporting value addition and development of what we call climate smart value chains of all this opportunity of products that are that can be produced and generated in these areas. Yes, the Sahel is dryland. Yes, the Sahel is a bit degraded, but actually the Sahel is a source of an important biodiversity of plants and of wildlife, but also plants including trees, grasses, and shrubs that are really very important for the communities, whether for agriculture, for food, for feed, or for also income generation. And the third component was really more supporting enabling environment with capacity development. We don't talk about capacity building, but we talk about capacity development, really building on the existing knowledge, on the existing information and practices from the local communities, and bring that more further and scale it up with the science and with science and technologies. So I will maybe give 2 main examples what has been really transformative through this program. One, Sheikh talked about, of course, the issue of the limiting factor, which is water, and the importance of water harvesting, either for farming or actually for forestry and for pasture land. So what we have been really doing in this program is, from one side, combining the beautiful, genuosity of engineering of the communities, which is really setting up these half moons that are digged in the soil, really to ensure that water is collected and also land is prepared for the farming or for restoration. But this can be, of course, continue like that, maybe through small scale, in agroforestry systems, for instance. And it is really very hard, a very hard labor and you could look at the women who are really mainly, digging these half moons. And we need 100 people to dig 1 hectare per day. 100 people, can you imagine? And the soil preparation depth at the end would be like 50 centimeters. So we can really, of course, collect water. But through this project, what we have done is really to make sure that we introduce this mechanized technology that is exactly inspired from the traditional uses and the practices, and support really a bigger treatment of the land, which is barren, which is really hard to dig by hand on important areas, and also in a record of time. So with this structure and what we call a plow, which is called the Delfino. So with this, you could actually have 15 to 20 hectares per day already, digged, and using just 1 mechanic, and 2 drivers. And of course, it is less taxing. It's true that in the beginning, you will be certainly invest in buying the equipment and in the maintenance, etc. But this at the end, at the long term, will really prove to be cheaper than doing it by hand. And you will have more actually water harvested. For example, we could have 1,000 liters rainwater harvested in half moon per season. So this is just to give you one important, technology that could really support and speed up this work. And it has been really done already through this project. The second is really the importance of biodiversity. Biodiversity key for resilience. We know that for climate change adaptation and resilience, we need diversification. And the diversification of plants and what we use and what we eat and what we consume, as well as then this could also provide a diversification in socioeconomic terms. So, for example, in this particular case, communities have been also again put at the center. So they were the ones who have been telling us, probed, of course, based on consultations about what species, what plants they want in their land to return and for which use. And they have been, it's incredible, within these 6 or 7 or 8 countries, there have been at least a total of 200 different species of plants that communities, women and men, have been really identifying and choosing to restore their land. And these are of multiple uses, including for health, for food, for feed, for fuel, for veterinarian also medicine, for bee and for material, etc., etc., and as well as environmental uses, certainly. So with this diversity and within this project, we have been using from these 200 species, 110 species across these areas. And the result, as you could see, it has been transformative, combining traditional practices with technology, with biodiversity, the science, and the usefulness of these species. We have been really going from, we have been able to have with the communities, with the partners, NGOs and government agencies, to support the restoration of 60,000 hectares of lands in 5 years. Okay? So you may say, oh, Nora, you have said that we need to restore 100 million hectares by 2030. And here you are talking about a drop in the desert, like 60,000 hectares. But each hectare count actually in the Sahel for each community. This has been really benefiting 1 million people in 500 different communities across the Sahel. And of course, this then has also provided very good socioeconomic benefits, so for livelihoods, For example, when we talked about biodiversity, we are talking also about wildlife, so reintroducing wildlife that once existed in the Sahel, so and setting up this ecotouristic ecotourism and nature-based, community-based nature reserve, to the agriculture, to the really increasing production, to the preparation, for example, of soap, you know, by women's cooperative using balanitis oil, and as well as, for example, for honey production. And you could see here, of course, fodder for the animal. And one example is gum arabic. That is, I think many of the participants here actually had an encounter of this product coming from the Sahel in their drinks, for example, in the Coke or in many yogurts, because it is really very much used in as an emulsifier. So just to say, the benefits of the Sahel are not only, you know, benefiting the communities directly on the ground, but also the whole world, either by benefiting for climate change mitigation and adaptation, but also by providing these important non-timber forest products that are really very important for everybody. I think I will stop here. I have been really maybe talking long, I hope not so long. So I just to give a teaser of what the Great Greenwall is, and how, for example, give an example of an FAO project that has been implemented there. And of course, globally, Harry, you have asked me to say, where are we with the Great Greenwall? Where are still the challenges? Of course, so far, for example, there was an assessment from the UNCCD with many partners saying that there are now only 4 million hectares that have been restored. So we are really still very far from the target of 100 million by 2030. But the challenges are immense. Challenges include funding, but we heard these days, these weeks, and this year about all these pledges, funding pledges from different partners, organizations. So I think hope is there, but we need to make this money go to the communities, to the village. So this is one. Second, of course, this is an immense program. So it needs really a better coordination, harmonization, integration of different sectors. So it's not just about forest. It's not only about grasslands or pasture. It's also about agriculture. It's also about energy. It's also about water. So health. So many sectors need still to be really coordinated at the country level by the Great Greenwall agencies themselves to really support this work. And third, making sure that this what we have been doing so far is really scaled up, and ensure that the good practice is really let's say implemented on the ground with the support of technical partners. Like, for example, FAO is committed still to continue working more on the Great Greenwall, ensuring that what has been done so far, the solution exists. No time to lose. We need to continue the road, towards this, important initiative that is exemplary, I think, of solidarity, of what people being solidar and with all the different sectors could do in some time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nora. That was very much appreciated, that enthusiastic overview of the efforts undertaken, the challenges that remain. And I see already a lot of questions for you in the Q&A, some of the questions pertaining to the role of traditional ecological knowledge, others about some of the resource constraints, about the efforts you're undertaking. So do have a look there. We'll also come back to them later, of course, in the conversation. I'd now like to bring in Husseini to give us a bit of a perspective from Niger. And as we said, to talk a bit more about the role of community in environmental peace building, and trying to think indeed of resources as ways of bringing people together rather than pitting them against one another. Husseini, over to you whenever you're ready.
So thank you so much, Harry, for the introduction you did earlier, and really thank you for inviting me, presented with these two amazing scholars. You already have heard them. Really happy to be presenting, telling the story of the Sahel. 3 weeks ago, on November 2nd, in Niger, in the tribal border area of Liptako Goma, share with the Burkina Faso, Mali. "69 self-defense militia were ambushed and killed by insurgents. Prior to that, 135 slaughtered just near the border of Mali. So many atrocities, on and on. Villagers will be imposed taxes, being robbed. You may wonder what all these stories have to do with our discussion here. Well, maybe the stories will trigger and make us think that the issue, the security dimension in Sahel has more ramification. The problem is more complicated than we think. And like Nora and Sheikh already mentioned, the Sahel just below the Sahara Desert, from Djibouti to Senegal, comprised of 14 countries, within which or among which very socio-economic reality, but they have one thing in common, which is the threat from the Sahara Desert, which is pushing downward at a very alarming pace, pushing the inhabitants from north towards the south, leaving behind them unproductive land, and in the south, the collaboration between the newcomers and the autochthon have been very difficult, compounding the already difficult coexistence between, and I know Harry has been working intensively on that, animal herders, farmers, fishers, herders, government official, local governments who are in charge of the regulation in the agro-silvopastoralism. And the situation is getting worse and worse in a part of the world where the livelihood security depends mostly on agro-silvopastoralism, and the climate change is transforming the part, and fishers become fishers like farmers become farmers slash fisher, etc. And here already in this picture, if you can see where two teenagers pasturing a cow near a millet farm, and barren land right here, this cow can run to the millet farm. The farmer already struggling from the diminishing crop yield due to climate change and climate and land degradation. So the common knowledge and the climate security literatures, and we all may know here, is that climate change increases resource scarcity, which increases more violence. In a region where more than 80% of the population depends on what the nature offers to them, the depletion of those natural resources due to climate change and land degradation raises competition. And when the local conflict resolution system is defaulting, that may lead to conflict. Climate change increases food insecurity, high food price. the average Western inhabitants spend roughly 8% of their income on food. In sub-Saharan African individuals spend 2/3 of their income on food. Sahel is even worse, where people spend three-quarter of their income on food. More than 90% of Sahelians spend on food. And that region, people live roughly under $1.25 a day. Climate change increases poverty, which increases more violence. Climate change increases forced migration, internal displacement. The young Sahelian, frustrated, desperate, either flee or join armed group which incentivize them economically and social studies more than ideology. So here, climate change is a threat multiplier, but the real issue, maybe we should look at bad governance and mismanagement of competing natural resources, especially land. The main issue is governance around land. And like Nora said, land grabbing. I firmly believe, even the Sheikh mentioned it, that land grabbing is a driver for future conflict in Sahel. We are assisting here at the climate militarization, I should say climate colonialism. So maybe the solution resides in a robust, sustainable climate finance. And we heard, like Nora said, some pledge $2 billion, I can't call names here, Bezos of Facebook, African Development, the German government, Jeff, Green Climate, but those investments cannot succeed if we don't recalibrate, if we don't revisit the old traditional neoliberal intervention in the Sahel by listening to the population on the ground who have been there for thousands of years and have learned by trial and error, who are in tune with the nature that they know best, by giving traditional and central authorities, maybe in each community, find person liaisons who know the problem of the community and try to coordinate dialogue with other communities in this multidisciplinary approach of sustainable development interventions. Maybe revisiting the legal pluralism. That Africa and Sahel inherited modern norms that have been transposed upon the customary, the traditional norms, and that has created more problems. Making room to the Sahelian identity, not to take Sahel as a one block, many contexts in Sahel. Prioritizing the community understanding and approaches, what climate change means to the Sahelian. I heard food security, talk about access and availability of food, maybe food taste. Prioritizing the climate action inclusion, putting a woman, youth, and other marginalized at the center, at the front of the decision making. Transfer of knowledge, bottom-up approach, that's the trend now, but the bottom-up approach by itself does not suffice when you don't converge with the bottom top-down approach. But we need to be careful not to put aside the indigenous knowledge. I heard a lot here this amazing intervention talking about the Pan-African Greenwall but that Pan-African growth need to be localized, need to really look at the local realities on the ground. This de-westernization, I should say, or localization of the peace building effort are taking place in many places in the Sahel. And one, I should say, is the Chida that I visited, where the local government, international partners, private sector, and local communities get together to transboundary collaboration using the indigenous tree, the acacia, using the indigenous knowledge of sustainable land management that Nora mentioned to reverse the land degradation, which will create social cohesion when our pastoralists, the animal herders, and other groups come together for the common good that create our social security. The tree, the working from the beginning of the project to the product itself, the Gom Arabic source of labor, cash crop for the local inhabitant involved in the project, also a promising commodity for those countries called in the belt of the Gom Arabics. A way to also use here the indigenous knowledge and the reviving which knowledge being in this year too because of I should say colonial educational system and also neoliberal intervention. So a very good way to revive those indigenous knowledge, which will collaborate with modernization to make the practice more sustainable. And I think I will stop here and I will come in the discussion talking more about the Gom Arabic and other projects around the Sahel, especially in Niger. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Husseini. Very much appreciated your presentation and the personal remarks you're making, and also drawing our attention to the very personal but sometimes very extreme situations in which people may find themselves, and therefore also the stakes of this discussion. This is indeed not just an intellectual exchange, but it's one with huge real world consequences, of course, and implications. So thank you very much for that. Before we open it up to our audience and working with some of the questions in the Q&A, I now turn to my colleague Laura to perhaps offer a few reflections or also comments from her perspective that we can then relay back to our panelists. Laura. You're on mute, I'm afraid.
Sorry about that. I was just saying how moved I was by what you said and how comprehensive the sets of remarks and knowledge you shared with us is. And I can see the commonalities with my region. You know, the Amazon forest, you could say, is exactly the opposite. You know, this green tropical rainforest area, where we're talking about the desertification area. However, I would like to bring that comparison a little bit further and ask question to the three of you. What I see as similar is that we have a massive region which has a lot of regional importance as well as global importance in terms of climate change negotiations, and which is shared by a number of countries. I mean, you have 12 countries, we have 9 countries. Millions of people involved in the area, and the stakes are very high in terms of biodiversity protection, and the UN as a kind of multilateral mechanism to help make decisions around restoration, the very important issue of local knowledge and local conditions and local understandings of what is happening. So what I take from the first intervention by Sheikh is that absolutely extraordinary issue. I didn't even know about this deep groundwater and how it could be quite easily being brought to surface and make a massive difference. So if I take that issue, which has more to do with geographic ecological conditions, with what Husseini tells us about the difficulty of harnessing mechanism between the local level and the national government level, all kinds of questions come to my mind in terms of what kind of regimes of ownership, what kind of distribution mechanism could be put in place to share, you know, and a lot of the constraints and the conflicts around disappearing resources could be solved if new resources could be harnessed and shared and distributed in another way. And so that brings me to what Nora said, you know, from this kind of UN multilateral perspective, it seems like all the solutions are there. There are mechanisms to mobilize financing as well. But I didn't hear much in what Nora was saying about the national level. I can see a lot of stuff on the local, I can see a lot of stuff on the international, but how can we bridge this kind of nation state, this kind of national ownership of this agenda? So those would be some of the questions I'm trying to put to the three of you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Laura, for those remarks, for those questions. Perhaps we'll give indeed a chance to our panelists first to respond, perhaps also to offer some observations regarding each other's presentation. So, Sheikh, why don't we start with you first, and then we'll work our way down the panel as we have in the past. Sheikh, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ari, and thank you, Laura, for those remarks. I just have 3 quick points to make on Laura's observation. First is you can't build resilience in the Sahel without tapping into neglected plants. The FAO, sorry, my colleague from FAO, your report on food security is limited to few crops. The diversity of plants we have in the Sahel, the fonio, the pulses, the various vitamin-rich product in trees, can be, you know, extended to respond to food security. So the first, you know, offer to me is to make a diversification. In addition to the multifunctional approach of the Great Greenwall, let's work on local plants and invest on them. The second point is, it goes to my colleague Husseini from the security. I think he got it very right. I always support the issue of inclusive security. You can't talk about human security without talking about energy security, food security, water security, and all those things can't come together. If you see now, some people ask in the chat box, where can we implement the Great Greenwall without facing the jihadists or the Islamist group? And you have to flip the question. The Islamist group are just established because there is no job opportunity for young people, most of it. And then if you create opportunities for them, it's likely that you can just flip the relationship. Opportunities and inclusive job opportunities. And last one, I think, Laura, you mentioned it. Any top-down, the national thinking and bringing them to the communities would be counterproductive. We should just embrace a bottom-up approach where the communities express their aspiration. We invest directly on them. There is no broker, and work in order to really scale up some practice. Just few skimmed response to some of the reflections I hear, Doctor.
That's great, Sheikh. That's very, very well summarized. Nora, I want to turn to you indeed with perhaps that point that both Laura and Sheikh both raised, which is about the state, the national level. Now, clearly we're dealing with a region where states have sometimes questioned legitimacy, a checkered history with their own populations. At the same time, of course, FAO is responsive to member states, and that is an important building block for the approach. How do we try to reconcile those two impulses, if you like, and how do you think about that in the work you're doing on the ground?
Thank you very much, Harry, Sheikh, and Laura. So I would respond on 2 points. So the ownership, the ownership, the member countries' ownership, the government ownership, and of course the bottom-up approach. One is that I think maybe because of time, it was not easy, of course, to give all the history. The Great Greenwall started by the ownership of the governments and heads of states. So this is one. So they are in it already from the start in 2007. And what we have been doing, and of course, supported by the African Union Commission, and then in 2010, they came together, 11 countries, they came together, they set up what we call the Pan-African Agency of the Great Greenwall, where the member states are contributing even to the functioning and to the governance of this agency. And they set up also in each of the countries what we call a national agency of the Great Greenwall. Some of them more, let's say, with an institutional, let's say, decree and law, etc. And some of them are coordination units within the ministries, within their respective ministries. That many of them. So FAO since 2009 has been working together with those national agencies and the Pan-African Agency and the African Union to work at the country level, because the Great Greenwall was like one idea, no? It was a concept, it was one idea to go through a consultative process at the country level together with the communities, with the different stakeholders to develop what we call a national strategy and action plan for the Great Green Wall, and with really consultations with municipalities and communities on the ground. So they have come up with this action plans, plus and then a coordinated, harmonized Great Greenwall strategy that also build the dots between all the countries and for support. So this is, I think, is really very important. But what is lacking at the country level, I tell you, what is lacking is actually to make sure that those agencies themselves take the helm and ensure that they coordinate all their stakeholders at the country level, with the sectors, with the partners at country level, and not just doing it at the global level from the UN system or from the Pan-African Agency regionally, but also at the country level, which is really very important. And now the agencies are setting up what they call the Great Greenwalls, les alliances nationales of the Great Green Wall. So they are really doing that, but step by step, they need really more support, institutional capacity to do that. And countries have been already, many countries have been setting up and providing funding for the Great Green Wall before, you know, the financial partners. So they have also allocated national budgets, maybe not enough, but they have also done efforts, and I think these efforts need to be scaled up from nationally, but also globally and regionally. The other point I wanted just to say related to the biodiversity, Sheikh, you spoke about fonio, about niebe, etc. All these species are the species we are planting. I'm not saying we, the communities are planting with the support of FAO, bringing the grasses which are good for food, which are actually not forgotten species or not forgotten crops or food, but actually maybe less known by others. So I think this is really very important, and this is what we have tried to make sure that these 110 species are not just trees, but they are also the fonio and the niebe, etc. And I wanted also, because I think for the sake of the audience, actually within FAO we have what we call now, and it has been really very important, this strategy, FAO strategy on mainstreaming biodiversity in agriculture sectors. So biodiversity is really on the top of the agenda of member countries and FAO itself, in order to ensure that biodiversity, whether it's plants or there was even a state of biodiversity in agriculture, for food agriculture, that exactly raise those issues that Dr. Sheikh has mentioned, to ensure that we diversify and we get the other crops that are more adapted. They are traditional, they are actually in the pride of communities, consumption, and need support, and to make sure that we have good food systems that integrate biodiversity, sustainable use, and restoration and management. I think, and one other point I wanted really to make sure that it is really clear regarding, I think it's important to say, I thought maybe one message I wanted to bring is that, okay, the ambition is huge, the challenge is huge, no? But we have solutions, there are solutions, okay, which should be, of course, contextualized in each of the areas based on the needs of the communities in question, etc., in the villages and so on. But we need support, also investment in sustainable mechanization, in sustainable technologies, in order to energy, like renewable energy, etc., in order to support, because we cannot today afford that communities are still using those, very archaic tools and say that they will be one day food secure. It is not possible. So we need really to make sure and realize that, and they need the support from their governments, of course, but all from the international community, including in the climate action, because the funding is still, normally the ambition is still there, the $100 billion per year to support communities and people who are suffering the most, even if they have not, how can I say, contributed to the emissions the most. So I think it's really very important now to reverse the thing and make sure that we see the communities, as an important, the Sahel as an important area where we can all work as one world, one planet, one humanity to support this work, and not per charity, no, because it's just, because it's important. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nora, for that very impassioned, but I think very well merited intervention and emphasizing that last point. Indeed, this is a question of rights and indeed of justice, not of charity or anything else. Perhaps we'll turn to Hosseini. I mean, I see that meanwhile we've had a very lively discussion in the Q&A going on, which is fantastic to see, encouraging more of that. We're going to go to Hosseini now, and then I'll pick a few questions from the Q&A for further discussion here. Hosseini, over to you. Sorry, Hosseini, I think you're still on mute. There we are.
Thank you so much, Laura. Interesting question. It's really related to a question I already saw in the chat. How can we make sure those ambitions can take off or can be implemented in the region where the security, the hard security is not meeting? This is very important. Hard security, the traditional security is very important. The military intervention is very important, which will salvaguard the ambition, the human security, the food security that we're talking about, and the investment in the environment that we're talking about. But to go back to a Sheikh intervention, when he mentioned the demographics as one of the drivers of insecurity in the Sahel, which can also be a very good potential for Sahel when the young, in Africa, in Sahel, you're 16 years old, you're already old, just joking. The average age being 15 years old. So we have label, ambitions. If we invest in those people, that's a good potential for the Sahel. In a region where the HDI is the lowest in the world, the PPP, the weakest in the world, and with an exponential population that would double every other 10 years. If you don't invest in human security, if you don't invest in those people, that will explode. That's a conversion that will create a very big problem. So again, we need to look at how to make sure the security is there. Demographic, I've mentioned the political also drivers, the geopolitical drivers, the geostrategical drivers, and the geographical position of the Sahel. How can we make sure those mosaic countries, landlocked, will coordinate, collaborate to get one force and work together? We say bottom up. I'd say also at the nation level, Laura question, coordination instead of going one by one, tackling those efforts. I think I will stop here and I'll come back with more responses.
All right, thank you so much for saying that. That leaves me with perhaps picking up on some of the last remaining themes in the Q&A, which has been very, very interesting. I see 3 or 4 things, and again, the panelists feel free to pick any of them that you feel you're best placed or you're well placed to respond to perspectives on. The first is a question indeed of some of the trade-offs that you have all highlighted between energy, water, and food. Clearly, this is important all around the world, but perhaps particularly important in the Sahelian region, and the way in which security or insecurity in one domain may foster security or insecurity in another. There's a specific question there about energy access and the importance of linking questions of energy to questions of the Great Greenwall and other forms of intervention that we've been talking about. How do we give energy its central place, the central place it deserves, especially energy access for people who don't have it at the moment, or certainly not in a sustainable way? How do we do that? So that's one question. The second question, I think, raised by Anis, important question, is a question about accountability. So we've spoken a lot indeed about different levels of intervention, the local level, the global level, the national level. We've spoken about some of the promises and the long history, again, of initiatives and interventions at these various levels in the Sahel. But how do we ensure accountability? What does accountability look like in this context? Accountability for FAO, if you like, accountability for national governments, for scientists, academics working in these various domains. It's an important thing to reflect on, at least for a moment. Then thirdly, perhaps a question also that's important is, this is a region, as you've all highlighted, with a long history, but also a long history again of external plans to change this region, to remedy some of the problems. What do you think are some of the main lessons from that history of interventions, of things that we've now learned, that we now know to tackle better or tackle in a different fashion than perhaps before, than perhaps 20 years ago or 30 years ago, or even 5 years ago? And finally, and this was brought to my attention by Laura, and she's absolutely right, the entire question of migration and urban-rural migration. Are there ways in this discussion that we're having at moving the entire question of migration out of this very, often very negative, very defensive way in which people talk about migration, to highlighting perhaps some of the more dynamic and positive aspects of migration that might also be part of successful adaptation strategies in this region? After all, of course, as any nomad would remind us, migration is a way of life, historically been a very positive driver of change and indeed of the creation of livelihoods, rather than the reverse. I appreciate it as our 4 very big themes, and you could probably all say a lot of things about these, but to the extent that you feel you may want to offer some final comments on them, I'm sure our audience would be most appreciative. So again, we perhaps first turn to Sheikh, then Nora, and then Husseini.
Thank you so much, colleagues. I think the more we deep dive into the Sahel, the more fulfilling and exciting it is. I'm in my ecosystem, and I really like the way or the approach you guys are packaging it. Just trying to get your points one by one. First of all, Harry, the trade-off or the synergies between energy, water, and food, and you should add land. We can't just get land out of that nexus. is absolutely central to the objectives of restoring the side of food security. With the trend, what you can see, if you take all rich land, the North Basin of Senegal River in the Ferlo area, Senegalese River, you take the Mopti Delta, Interior Delta region, you take the Lake Chad area, you take all areas along the Niger River, the people who are getting the most benefit from those land, water resource, and energy sources are not probably the local communities, but the agribusiness people who have the financial capital, who can really invest into those things. The main challenge that the communities has is to access to credit. Because the bank system is not fit for purpose. You cannot go to the bank without having a proper land title deed and borrow millions of CFA that makes you bring your water pump and your energy supply system to develop a scale agriculture. So they are locked in a system which is like a smallholder farming, and they try to do their best to survive in those systems. So that's a big question, which is, accessing to credit, accessing to the financial capital. The agribusiness guys are doing it in addition to the land grabbers coming outside. The second point, which is coming to your migration issue, is what you need to understand, my friend Harry, is I don't see any pastoral person or any nomad person who would change his way of life based on an offering of another way of doing business as they do, because it's a cultural thing. It's a part of a humanity of a Fulani to go for 3 months in the bush, to raise the cattle and to bring them back safely. It's a part of the education. It's the same way we go to school. It's the same way they're asked to do that. I was in a PRAPS meeting, which is a World Bank funded program. It's a program for resilience on agropastoral system in West Africa. And the guy from Mauritania says, you have to see all the culture and the education and the values and norms which comes with the nomad system that can't just be voided because you're wanting to intensify a system. So we need to do some kind of sort of embedding any solutions to the traditional values, and it's absolutely central to adjusting what we need to do here. The energy access, I think it's very key. As I told you, the potential of energy in West Africa is huge. The wind energy, solar energy, etc. The investment that is needed upfront to have a solar energy system, that investment is coming down. But now it should be based on a deliberate policy by the government to get those micro level energy access for solar energy, for solar pumping, and all those solutions. And again, access to credit and new funding, the green finance things or the green jobs opportunities can be unlocked. In terms of accountability, I think there are so many layers. If you take $1 billion investment in the Great Greenwall, starting from the government, going to some NGOs, going down to local district managers, going down to some powerful people who have the power in local areas, before it comes to the local communities who implement at the end of the day the program, those people get just like few fractions of that $1 billion, and it's not meaningful to operationalize any of the strategic vision that we have. How can we shorten the process with all due transparency in order to get more operational fund to the community for them to implement things such as the Great Greenwall? I think it's a big open question, but I want to leave it to you and cede it to your mind for reflection with my other colleagues. Over to you.
Oh, Marsha, thanks so much. That was a real tour de force, packing a lot of thoughts in a few minutes. But thanks so much for doing that. We really appreciate it. Nora, over to you for some final reflections on your part.
Thank you very much. I will start with accountability. That's a very good question, Harry. And I think for the accountability, everybody should be, but we need a framework, a common framework, a comprehensive framework, which is either a results-based or call it a monitoring system that really could track who is doing what and where and what is the impact. And I think we owe it to the communities, we owe it to the governments, we owe it to the donors, etc., etc. So I think this is very important, but the best way to do it actually is from one side doing it at the country level, coordinated by exactly those agencies that are responsible to lead the implementation or the monitoring of the Great Greenwall in their country, and bring in around them all the different stakeholders and the partners who want to invest, and make sure that there is no really overlapping and scattering, but really put the puzzle all together in the countries. And of course, at the regional level, through the Pan-African Agency of the Great Greenwall, which has its, you know, ministerial conference, it has heads of state summit, it has the experts group, etc., etc. That would work, of course, with the countries and the partners. But to do that, we need to have a real baseline, you know, a baseline. And we have been working together with the African Union Commission, with the Pan-African agencies, with the Great Greenwall national agencies, and many other, and experts from the countries themselves, and set up a baseline already. We have that baseline on the forest and land use, you know, on environment, agriculture, and land use in not only in the Sahel, the whole of Africa, a first continental Africa, how can I say, assessment, digital assessment that has been done, you know, and it would be really, how can I say, it is also objective, because using good technology, but of course with the good expertise of the locals to interpret the images and so on and so forth. So this is one, I think, and it could work. And I think we have been, let's say, hitting a wall, and now I think we are getting there. The second point related to the energy issue, of course, there are different solutions that can be combined, and because we cannot now say, okay, today, okay, the Sahel will move out from fuel wood, including firewood, including charcoal, you know, for cooking, no, because it's really impossible currently. But what we can do from one side is to support sustainable management of the forest and of the woodlots, to ensure a good management and also restoration of the degraded land, supporting a bit of sustainable supply for you know, for energy, for cooking, etc., for the communities, and at the same time really working and speeding up supporting renewable energy like wind energy, solar energy. I don't know if you have heard of this important program that is now launched by the AFDB, African Development Bank, to support the Desert to Power initiative, actually to contribute to the Great Greenwall. But of course, this needs really to be speed up and also scaled up as soon as possible. And then, of course, I think the main lessons, whether it's about migration, whether it's about whatever what we are doing, please, let's not forget to leave the choice for the people. People, for example, the most important thing, migration is not bad. If it is not forced, it is not bad. It's a choice, you know. Whoever can migrate for any reason, you know, so that's good. But when it is forced, of course, it's really problematic, and we need to ensure that we support, we prevent and make sure to really develop opportunities, alternative opportunities for the communities, for the people to stay in their areas if they wanted really to stay. And the security is this, actually. It's not just, you know, using armed you know, weapons to address the issue, but actually the real, let's say, weapon is really sustaining the natural capital and the land and the socioeconomic alternatives for the communities, whether they are youth, women, to really thrive in their land. And this is what the Great Greenwall, I think, is about. And step by step, I hope really, I finish this reflection by a note of hope to say, that we will make sure to realize it. And finally, I wanted I will send a link later in the chat. There has been a very interesting, really exciting paper that has been just released last week on Nature. actually by a colleague of mine. I think he's following here, Mokhtar Sakande, and another colleague from FAO with the Bonn University scientists on exactly this issue, how, you know, land restoration in the Great Greenwall and security, the issue of security and the issue of investment and the economic efficiency and targeting really impacts or work investment on the ground should be taken up. And they had really done a wonderful work, providing already the basis and the good information. So to target the work, the land restoration in areas where normally can be still secure, because yes, there is a problem of security, but it is not in every hectare of the Sahel. So let's not forget that. So there are still mosaics of secure land where we need to support people in their work, in their efforts. Thank you.
Right, Nora, well taken. Hussaini, perhaps over to you for some final reflections on your part.
Yes, I'm going to fly through, almost past the time. I'm more, first of all, the energy. I've been working on a book project, a chapter on climate security and that represent the member state approaches. And when I look at the policy document, then I'll compare with the statement, official statement within countries. Then on the international scene, I see a mixed message telling that Africans are not really ready to give up the ambition, even if the energy is dirty. Clean energy is the way to go. Investment need to be there, but with the COVID-19, for example, revealing the limit of the multilateralism, those policymakers being very careful, and they talk about climate injustice. We checked about climate sink countries. If we didn't put it, why would you invest in me? And when your investment doesn't come through, why would we trust and not to go for our dirty energy and develop our country? The second point, the migration. Nora said immigration is good. Yes, immigration is good. I'm here in the United States, coming from a village from Africa. Yes, Sheikh said that is cultural thing. You know, we don't hear this much in the media. Migration is a source of income for the Sahel between the seasonal the previous season and the dry period, where people come to the cities and work and send back to their families to support them. But if there is no hope going back, so people stay, either be victims of insecurity or contribute to insecurity in the slums in those cities. Many people going down south compared to the few numbers that are going up that are being hidden, the buzz in the news. So if we stop migration without carefully looking at how to really get people to get involved, they're going to turn to something like land mining, which is going on in the Sahel, and contributing to the land degradation, which in turn is getting food insecurity. Accountability point, I would say just cut the middleman. Just find a way that those investment goes straight to the people in need. Maybe we can use the internet and technology. In Africa, most people got 2 cell phones with the access to internet. If the internet is affordable, again, another way of investing. I will, the land restoration that Nora mentioned, I would say if it's the Africa 100 or Pan-Africanist Greenwall, please go for the indigenous species, especially the acacia, which will take care of the trade-off that Harry mentioned, using the dual crops. Harry is already profiting by hand-picking the acacia and bring it to the local community. If we say, let's plant more trees to good, a natural-based approach, but more trees planted, maybe we'll go pastoralist land, the farmland, the pasture land, and the corridors that how can we do that? But when you get trees like the acacia will accept the dual crop, maybe we can remediate that issue. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Husseini. Let me perhaps hand over to Laura for a final few words before I close our session here. But Laura, do you have any last things to share with us?
No, just my warm wishes. I know each of you have got such a very rich experience, and it's such a massive region of the world, and there is obviously a lot more diversity and complexity than we were able to go through in a short session. But hopefully we will have more conversations. Hopefully we will multiply, you know, exchanges and collaborations, because I know that the work that each of you is doing is absolutely crucial, not just for your region, but for the world at large. So thank you again very much.
All right. Well, let me thank you, Laura, again for the partnership. It's been fantastic working together with the Oxford Department of International Development on this. Let me thank, of course, my colleague Caitlin here at Columbia for hosting us, and of course our panelists who've done an absolutely outstanding job of highlighting indeed the complexity of this region, but also very importantly the opportunities, the ways in which people can make sense of their changing conditions, circumstances, and act positively, creatively on that world and in the world. So thank you very, very, very much. I learned an incredible amount, and I look forward to taking these conversations forward in the weeks and months to come. As many of you listening in will know, this was from us on the Columbia side, another iteration of a series, another event in a series of events that we're putting together on African perspectives on climate and climate adaptation. We've got another one coming up on December 13th, very specifically focused on urban-rural transformations, with particular relevance to East Africa. Please join us for that. I think Caitlin in the chat also posted a list of other upcoming CJEP and CEPA events. And I think Laura, of course, also provided a link to some of the initiatives happening at Oxford.
Yes, and I forgot to mention, we have in our lecture series, we will have a speaker from South Bahia in Brazil. He is one of the most well-known leaders of the Brazilian agroecology movement, who will be talking about grassroots events, grassroots struggles, really. And a lot of it, when it comes to rural development, I'm afraid, has a lot in common, you know, whatever ecosystem we are in. So I hope you'll be able to join us and exchange ideas in the Q&A for that one as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much all, and wish you a wonderful rest of the day, however many hours remain for you wherever you are in the world, and hope to see you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank you, Harry.